We have worked on this issue of linking smallholders to markets for quite a number of years, and I think we have come to realize that it has a number of limitations. Probably all of you know that the large majority of small-scale producers is not organized, and they're far from being competitive and being able to have a say in the governance of change. Also, the diversity within their production systems doesn't fit always very well with market requirements, which drive specialization. We've seen also over the recent years high volatility and risks associated with these markets. And we have, for instance, witnessed businesses stepping out from a constructive relationship with smallholders because consumer demands were changing. So what we are seeing is actually that there is a need to acknowledge more the need to strengthen the capacity of small-scale producers so that they can make their own choices in the face of a changing environment, changing in terms of market conditions, but increasingly also climate conditions. So that is, in short, smallholder agency. To see what that means, we have engaged in a collaboration with the International Institute for Environment and Development, IIED, on a joint knowledge program called Smallholder Agency in the Globalized Market. And the idea behind this program is really to develop or to deepen existing knowledge, to deepen it, to develop new insights, and seek linkages between the two approaches of linking producers to markets and civic-driven change. I would say that the road to discovery is a bumpy one. It's not easy, and I think it's very nice to have this seminar right now, which is an excellent opportunity to involve others in this debate, to have shared reflections, deepen the debate, but also develop new insights and maybe come up with new strategies. The debate of today, we will have until 4 o'clock. We will have 2 rounds of debate, and each one of them will be introduced by a number of speakers, all of them sitting here. I will introduce them later. But before introducing them, I would like to introduce also the co-organizers of the event. IIED, represented by Bill Vorley, and we have Giel Ton of SFIM. Bill, I would like to invite you for the formal launch of the Provocation, and then followed by Giel.
Thanks very much, Carol, and a warm welcome to all of you from me and IIED, and a warm welcome to the people who are also on this Provocation seminar over web streaming around the world. So a warm welcome to those global participants as well. As Carol said, many of us in our organizations work on 2 streams. We have a stream which is around a market-based approach to smallholder development, where our understanding is that by bringing organized producers into trade with inclusive business supported by the right policies and the right institutions such as fair trade, we can meet these huge expectations that are now circling around smallholders, those expectations of smallholders as drivers of rural economic development, of providers of food security, as suppliers for agribusiness, of managers of natural resources, as adapters to climate change. A huge debate swirling in smallholder production. And that debate is captured in a paper which has been produced for this knowledge program, which will be available in the knowledge sharing fair downstairs, and also available for download. I think on the web stream there's also a link to that paper. And as Carol said, this debate has largely been set externally to small-scale producers themselves. The idea of producer agency has not got that much further than producer organization. That organized producers, organized production allows market access that market access allows development. But, and my organization, as I said, has been active in this pro-poor inclusive development. But how about this more wider definition of agency, the capacity of people themselves to make effective choices and to shape a powerful agenda that, that comes with strong actors? And IIED has been also involved in those ideas of democratizing debate and giving voice to marginalized producers. So is there a way of discussing and generating knowledge to support constructive debate between those two parallel threads that don't seem to talk to each other very much, except to throw rocks at each other, between rights-based and market-based approaches, for example, which is the title for our next provocation, by the way. So that was the idea behind this knowledge program, which Carol introduced as a joint partnership between IIED, Hivos, and the learning network convened by Mainumbi in Bolivia. And that learning network comprises most of our provocateurs sitting here today. And I'm very pleased to welcome them as well. And it was also the idea of bringing these parallel streams together that was the idea behind this series of provocations. This is our first one. You are our guinea pigs, and we will be taking lessons from each provocation to the next one being in Stockholm in January. And some of the partners of that series of provocations are here in the room. And as Carol said, our idea is not to trash the idea of pro-poor development, of value chains or inclusive business. Our idea is to provoke debate, to question orthodoxies, new and old, and to bring insights into this hot area of debate. I look forward to a very provocative and constructive debate. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bill. Then
advocacy strategies related with access of smallholders to markets. One of the countries where we work is Peru. One of the organizations we support is the Junta Nacional del Café, one of the presenters in this afternoon, Lorenzo Castillo. But we work in other countries in Africa and in Latin America and in Asia. Looking at our name, empowering smallholder farmers in markets, is quite close to the phrase of making markets work for the poor. So, yeah, why the provocation? What's the provocation? Or are we on the same line? I think there is need for provocation around making markets work for the poor. And our approach, our differences lies especially in the approach to reach the objective of smallholder inclusion in markets. The starting point is not the efficiency of the market system, but the empowerment of smallholders that face the reality of markets that have imperfections and that will have imperfections in the future. So making markets work for the poor, with capitals, the M4P, that's a major initiative led by the Swiss SDC and DFID, stresses the sustainability of service provisioning in markets. They emphasize that subsidies, preferential policies, special treatment to certain value chain actors are all part of conventional, and they see conventional as bad, tradition. They stress the importance of commercially viable service providers that manage to survive in competition, giving their services to farmers. On the political side, they tend toward privatization and liberalization of markets. They support the opening up of these service provisioning factor markets, making them more competitive, more agile and more efficient. And they do it with good intentions, and to make markets more pro-poor or more inclusive. In our work, we work with farmers' organizations, and we get a different perspective, and we get a different stance on the issue. We don't pretend to have a grand design for markets. We analyze real markets, real efforts, real frustrations of our partners, organized farmers, and we want to help them grasping the problems and designing proactive proposals to resolve key obstacles in the market system. And our analysis shows a little bit that the political tendency of making markets for the poor in capitals is that it led to a sort of a fragmented enabling environment for smallholder producers, while what smallholders need is a more coordinated intent to link infrastructure, financial services and market access in one way. And the mushrooming of different service providers, the mushrooming of different financial institutions is a solution for some, but it's not necessarily the way to get to coordination in value chains. One of the ways to do it, and not the only one, but the one we are supporting, is the coordination through collective action by farmers' organizations. And then you see that that coordination is fragile. It needs resources, it needs money to meet, to discuss, to analyze, to write ideas down. And one of the ways for them to get their needs met or their expenses paid for is to have a special niche in the market. And what we see is that in the movement around making markets for the poor, all those niche markets which are targeted to collective action to the support of farmers' organizations are under challenge. That's why we as SFIM are very pleased to be here and to be part of the provocation.
Okay, thank you very much. Or add other provocations, etc. So I would like to start here at my right-hand side. Lorenzo Castillo from Peru. Then we have Diego Munoz from Bolivia. Yeah, we have Sudhirendra Sharma from India. Faguni Gujarai, if I pronounce it well, yeah, from Nicaragua. And then we have Mohammed Sharif from Uganda. Welcome to all of you. As Bill already mentioned, this whole seminar is being live streamed, so people outside this room can follow the whole conference. They can also respond to the discussion taking place. Chats will come in via Lena, who's there to collect voices from outside this conference room, hopefully also a lot of voices from the south. I think we did some mobilization also in the south to really be part of this conference. As I mentioned earlier, we will have 2 rounds of debate, each one of them being introduced by a number of speakers. And I would like to invite the first speaker, which will be, where are you? No, you are there, Sudhirendra Sharma. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I bring greetings to you from the largest democracy in the world, perhaps, and the one which is suffering from deficit democracy at this point in time. We are growing at a much faster rate in terms of economic growth. The GDP is likely to touch double-digit mark fairly soon. And the paradoxical situation is that the poor are suffering on account of this economic growth. Millions of poor have been pushed out of the mainstream of development. When I say so, I am also realized and I am seized of the fact that over 200,000 small producers in India have committed suicide in the last 10 years. So the issue is much more compelling for the state, for the democracy, to provide legitimate livelihood survival strategies for the poor. We are running out of ideas, literally, if you come to the countryside. The poor are looking restless. They are also becoming agitated at times, and they're looking for hope. But on the contrary, the businesses are being subsidized in India to a larger extent. And that is what is leading to the growth that I just mentioned, 8.5%, expected to rise to 10% in the next few months. And this is at the cost of agriculture, which incidentally hasn't grown for the last few years. Expected growth rate for agriculture is supposed to be 4%. We're still languishing at about 2%. If you look at the flip side of the story is that the state is still pushing for retailing as a major corporate investment. The retailing, organized retailing I'm referring to, is pushing across unorganized retailers, which are numbered at about 40 million. Now, this is not to say that organized retailing is more efficient, most transparent, but this is to say that 40 million livelihoods are at stake when you push the corporate subsidized form of retailing onto the national agenda. What it finally leads up to, the local self-reliance gets challenged, and the dispersed ownership by the smallholders takes a backseat. Right to democratic self-governance has been challenged all these years. The tragedy is that on one extreme, the state, the country is fighting for deepening democracy, for which the driving principles are participation and negotiation. But the way in which corporate world is influencing the state, we're moving to a system where it will be packaging and selling for deepening democracy. I see a serious paradox in these two situations. Participation and negotiation versus packaging and selling. Does it work? Does it work in a situation like India, where farmers have less than 0.5 hectare of land with them? Rural livelihoods, if you look at the smallholders and others, it has always been linked to the market. As I mentioned before, the market may not be efficient, may not be transparent, may have been accumulating wealth at the cost of the poor, and yet it worked. It worked for several years. It worked for millennia, actually. Now we're moving on to a value chain linked market planning, just with an idea to erase poverty. It's like microfinance, which was used a few years ago, which is a buzzword. Value chain continues to be a buzzword now. We see it growing all across projects which are bilateral, multilateral, NGOs, INGOs. Value chain as a framework, as an approach for pro-poor market development is being talked about in India in a large number. But the experience shows that value chain does not necessarily fulfill the poverty alleviation idea. Because the efficient market, as we all know, it drives out the less competitive producers. And the differentiated gains actually create economic exclusion. Whereas the focus of such pro-poor market development has been to bring inclusive growth. It doesn't happen in reality. The local power dynamics, there is a shift in the power dynamics when you go to the rural areas. The powerful in the rural areas, they take the most of the benefits out of it. The poorest on the lower ladder, they are left out. And we are, mind you, we are referring to the bottom of the pyramid case as well as India is concerned. And the immediate economic gains that accrue from value chains or for development of value chains for linking the poor to the market seems very ephemeral. We see, therefore, the value chain, as we refer to it, is a seductive proposition, but it has got a very dangerous mirage. And that dangerous mirage is that it increases food insecurity for the poor. When I say food insecurity for the poor, because the value chain is developed on niche products, on niche markets, whereas farmers have a portfolio of activities for their own survival. They need not necessarily push for a niche product themselves, unless, of course, it is a non-timber forest produce in some parts of India or medicinal plants in some parts of from Nepal. Now, if these two situations are there, the niche product is there is an established market for the niche products, definitely value chains become a possible option to upgrade the economic lifestyle of the poor people. But that is only in isolated cases. This is one size doesn't fit all in the sub-Asian context. Wherever value chains are based on niche product, they have shown promising results. But where they are not based on niche products, they are based on imported ideas from elsewhere, they run into problems. And also it is learned through my own experience that value chains which have been developed by for-profit organizations, they grow faster than the non-profit organizations, supported value chains. Having said that, there are both the pluses and minuses of developing value chains as an approach to link the poor to the market. But market has its own driving principles. We can only wish the market to work for the poor, but it need not necessarily do that. And we haven't seen many examples of that happening in India and in Nepal. The trouble that I am facing today is, I'm personally, through experience, I'm saying we have to separate the noise from signal when it comes to value chains. There is so much of noise being raised about value chains that these work, and they are the panacea to eradicate poverty. But in reality, this is more of noise. The signal is that it need not necessarily do what is it expected to do. Let me give you a very simple example of a village in down south, which is surrounded by forest. Few households, about 10 of them, and they were selling their non-timber forest produce, which is a fruit from the forest. They were peacefully living across with this kind of system where somebody from outside, an external agent, will come to buy that fruit from them, which was locally available as a non-timber forest produce from the nearby forest. An organization makes an entry into that area and tries to link those people to the market so that they could produce more. Produce more means they could put more efforts to pull that fruit from the forest and try to bring into the market, because the idea of linking to the market is to bring more income for those families in the deep forest. What finally it leads to in my mind, is the fact that they were not exposed to markets, they were not exposed to middlemen, they were not exposed to the cost structure, they were not exposed to the all gamut of actors which play on the market arena. They were suddenly exposed to all of them, and they become vulnerable to the price structure, they were vulnerable to the transport of the material from their forest area, they were also vulnerable to the produce, the amount of produce that we had in the forest. So on one extreme, we had the resilience of the community challenged because of these add-ons in terms of value chains. We had the sustenance. We were looking, the problem was we were looking at the sustenance of the families. We wanted them to economically grow. But the sustenance, the trade-off was sustenance versus exploitation, if I may say so. And the resilience was trade-off between resilience and vulnerability. So are value chains now adding to the vulnerability of the poor? I suspect it is. Because they live on meager resources, they're bottom of the pyramid populations, their land holding is very small, they're doing a gamut of activities to survive. So if you bring value chain onto this agenda, onto their lifestyle, there's a danger of putting them into more vulnerable condition than they were before. Now, having said that, this is just one aspect of the story. If you look at if you leave it out, you find many more layers of the whole thing. And one of the interesting layers here is the fact that the environmental resources get depleted faster. If I'm talking of non-timber forest produce, or if I'm talking about the traditional material that they can extract from the forest or from the nature, the moment a value chain comes into play, a moment we link the poor with the market, they try to extract more from the same ecosystem on which they were dependent for the last 100 years or so. So there is an exploitation of the nature on account of the economic development paradigm that we present to them as a panacea for lifting them out of their poverty. So there are both sides to the coin, actually. So therefore, value chain has to be treaded more safe. We have yet not developed the safety nets for the poor. We know what market has done in the last few years, the meltdown of the market. The poor did not suffer as much in India because they were not part of the globalized world. Value chain, I wonder, value chain will link it up to the larger market-oriented world, and there would be a problem. There would be a problem at hand for the poor who are already at the receiving end of the state, which is running into deficit democracy. And if value chains are pushed more vigorously on them without having a landing gear, a safe landing gear in place, my fear is that this will lead to more crisis at the farm level than solutions at the farm level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Relate to the market and to negotiate contracts, to negotiate credits in one way or another with the contribution of the consumers of the developed world. And in this way they were able to develop themselves. Had it not been for the fair trade, then it would not have been possible to organize these capacities and to improve the livelihood circumstances of the smallholders. Nevertheless, we are still very worried that today, actually in the center of the smallholders, especially the producers of coffee, that there is going to be some rebellion towards the fair trade. Why are we fearing this? Well, there are a number of substantive changes in the market that are actually affecting the situation of the smallholders. One, to start off with, if there are high prices in the market, there will be a crisis within the organizations, and if the prices are low, then it will be a crisis of the producers, and that's actually where the role of the organization starts. The organization becomes the motor to support in order to avoid a major crisis and a major poverty. And nowadays, for reasons related to the market, well, the contracts that have been entered into by the smallholders in order to have access to credits with fixed prices, well, they can't meet their obligations because the prices that are paid nowadays for fair products are insufficient to cover for the cost. So therefore, the associations have a situation in which they fail to observe and meet their obligations, and therefore the members leave the organizations because they don't receive any support no longer. So therefore a situation arises of opportunities actually. We've been learning in the market yesterday, and now there are difficulties and a crisis ahead. So actually we are dealing with the question how we are going to generate a process that is going to permit that the actors of the chain within the fair trade are going to take the benefits. And that's actually, we are focusing on the supply from the side of the smallholders. We are very worried about the issue that there might be changes within the fair trade. For example, from the perspective of opening up new market, well, we have actually involved huge operators that have sold their advantages, and through these corporations, their smallholders have had access to fair trade. Secondly, smallholders have been contracted to participate in the fair trade, and this has actually been the basis for a solidarity in order to improve the conditions of the smallholders. So we are worried especially about the following. An example. Today, we might start to incorporate in the fair trade the gold trade, the diamonds, and these are actually mechanisms in order to mitigate the contamination through artisanal and other products. They don't evaluate the fact that especially the mining and handcraft industry have affected negatively the situation of the smallholders. Contamination, for example, in the rural areas. And these are side effects that we have been discussing, and we have actually raised these issues with the organizations in order for them to take decisions. It's not only the market that is promoting the fair trade. It's a combination, actually, of equity between all the actors that are present in the chain. And we should acknowledge the enormous contribution, and we should try to recover this process. So the great contributions of the fair trade. And why is it so important that we save, actually, the fair trade? Because of the principles and the values. We want to continue to work to improve the living conditions of the smallholders. We want to continue to improve our negotiations capacity to act in the market. The fair trade has permitted access to the solidarity banks with future contracts, and in this way we have been able to capitalize, especially in countries such as mine, where there are economic policies of exclusion especially for smallholders. Economic policies focus on viable sectors, sectors that are able to invest. Our smallholders don't have capital, they have no resources, and therefore no bank is providing them with adequate credits. So through the contracts, future contracts, the alternative bank, in this way, we are given opportunity and are we able to accumulate the production and comply with our contracts. And we think this is very positive. But nowadays, what we miss, we should articulate funds in order to capitalize the smallholders. It's not only the harvest, but how do we improve the production? How do we acquire equipment? How do we improve the production? And, for example, in the framework of the coffee, well, we don't have funds to renovate actually our equipment. After 20 years, well, our equipment is very old. But we have to invest, otherwise our production is going to suffer. We'll only be able to achieve a very low production, and we will only be able to continue with organic coffee if we are able to invest. For example, it would be very interesting to set up a campaign, biodiversity, cafe, cacao, coffee, and we won't be focusing on the product, but at biodiversity, actually. And this is very important to create awareness amongst the consumers. It's not the case that nowadays the prices that are provided and paid by the fair trade that alleviate poverty. No, we have to generate as well new opportunities, and the relation with the market is a key issue, and this is actually our challenge, this is our perspective, and we want to continue, and we want to bet actually on the production of smallholders with the capacity to negotiate prices, to negotiate standards, to obtain opportunities. Well, actually, in order to achieve the best conditions for our population. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for those two interesting contributions, I would say. Sudhir and Dar really mentioning that value chain development not necessarily leads to inclusion of small-scale producers, even mentioning examples of exclusion, and also food insecurity not being addressed through value chain development. Also issues like vulnerability and depletion of national resources were mentioned. And I think Lorenzo's case, well, it's clear on fair trade, it really helped in increasing capacities of small-scale producers, but he's challenging the concept or the approach right now in the current situation, where farmers have not been able to capitalize sufficiently on the gains made and to invest in their production system to negotiate with markets. I can imagine that it has raised a lot of questions, brought you on other thoughts. The idea is that we're not going to have a question and answering kind of debate. It's really an invitation to all of you to respond, to say whether you agree or not agree, whether you recognize it or whether you have other concerns which you would like to bring into the debate. So the way we will organize the debate is that we will have first 3 people who can, raise other issues, and Liz and Edith will be there to provide you with microphones. So who's interested in responding to the 2 provocations or even inserting new energy into this debate? Any volunteers? Okay. Are there other people as well? I first want to see who. There's one over there, yes, and over there. Okay, so we start with the first 3. You will be in the second round, sorry. Okay, Edith.
Me first, eh? Okay. My name is Khalid Ahmed Chaudhry. I was listening Mr. Sharma, and while he was talking about that the value chains create a situation that the local farmers or small farmers, become more vulnerable. And I was thinking about whether it is India or Pakistan, we have same culture. I mean, we have timber mafia, we have land mafia, we have those sort of people. I mean, without having, I mean, value chain organizations or networks or something, traditionally we have those people who are keeping these people, I mean, vulnerable. So it's not the value chain, I mean, which will create more, I mean, poverty in those areas, specific areas. But the most important thing is to include these farmers, or to make sure that these farmers are, the other workforce is assured a membership and inclusion in those value chains. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. There was another person. Yes.
Yes, my name is Don Jansen. I work, among others, for the DE Foundation, which is related to Sara Lee, one of the buyers of coffee. And for Don Lorenzo, for sure, he knows Uberiki Valley, our project there. My question or my comment would be, you refer now to fair trade, that in the time of high prices, farmers are dropping out of their organizations as a consequence of the way fair trade acts. Yes, that's very logical, because it's very easy for farmers, which have a very short-term horizon, to get higher prices in the other markets. Therefore, I think organizations should never solely bind themselves to sell fair trade coffee. They should find higher markets, other markets with higher prices. Like Uberiki Valley, they have fair trade, they have organic. They also sell to Starbucks. They sell to a lot of other organizations which pay high prices for good quality coffee. So if you say that fair trade farmers now drop out, it's partially because the farmers' organization is focused too much on fair trade only. And that's one remark I would like to make. The other one, Peru has a lot of organized farms. It's one of the few countries where a lot of smallholder farms are organized in comunidades or in cooperatives. What is the fraction of not organized farmers still in for example, coffee in Peru? Is it 50%? And who is working for them to get them a better trade possibilities?
Okay, thank you very much. We have a third person.
Hi, Menno Salvador. I'm with Contacts International Development, based in Utrecht. I was wondering, first of all, whether this microphone's close to my mouth. There you go. Whether we're focusing too much on commodities when we're discussing value chains. This morning we were in the business group, and those who were there would recall that perhaps we shouldn't be worrying too much about including farmers. But farmers ask farmers whether they even want to be included in being attached to a value chain that's so closely related to commodity. In other terms, perhaps the word market is much more a localized institution than a globalized linking to a value chain or a market. That's just a comment.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have the first person saying that maybe in a context like India, it's not value chain development which is causing increasing vulnerability, it's maybe the whole system. I think the second person is saying, well, it's logical that farmers are dropping out of the fair trade system under high prices, but the organizations should take up other marketing outlets to face that challenge or to respond to that challenge. And you're also saying, well, we're talking about markets and value chain development, but what about the unorganized producers? Are we really addressing them? And I think you're challenging the focus on commodities when we talk about value chain development. Yeah. The idea is not that the people here will respond. Of course, they can also react, but it's more up to the audience. So all of you can react to one of the speakers. So the floor is yours. I see Koen.
Thank you for these introductions. I think we are here with a lot of intelligent people and researchers and whatever. And I think we agree that markets have their failures, and that we agree that we need to address those market failures, and that standards are one of the means to address market failures. I'm not very happy with criticizing standards and saying it's not good, etc. I think we should be able to say, well, how should that correction take place? And if fair trade is not doing a good job, how should the job be done? And how should a standard look like in order to be a good standard to address market failures and specifically inclusiveness of smallholders? Thank you.
Okay. Maybe Lorenzo, you would like to respond to that.
Sí, muchas gracias. Yes, thank you very much. Very interesting questions. I will try to provide you with a number of reflections. Well, Starbucks in Peru is buying about 150,000 bags of 45 kilos, and the vast majority of this coffee has the fair trade seal, and it's actually sold by the corporations. It's a market existing, but it's functioning within the framework of the established prices. Well, the contracts run or are established in February, April, and this was when the prices were low, and then actually the buyers wished to fix the price in order to provide them with a guarantee. And if they didn't sign these contracts, I wouldn't have a credit line as a corporation. I couldn't harvest, actually, and this was a necessity for the smallholder, and actually I was almost obliged to sign the contract. And a lot of people who are active within the fair trade, they signed, and they said, well, we have no choice. And a number of them stated that, well, we are going to accumulate losses. And this was actually for the second year. The prices are high, have been high for over the last 2 years, and we are still incurring losses. And therefore, well, actually, they had to take into account human capital that had been achieved throughout the process of 20 years. Well, this was about to fall apart, and this is actually a reflection. All the actors within the chain, we share the risks and the benefits. And actually, that's something that should be taken into account. We have to share the risks and the benefits. The risks cannot be, well, part of the responsibility, be the liability of one actor, and this is something we should bear in mind. And actually, there is an increasing amount of competition on the market. We should take into account as well social and environmental aspects. In Peru, in '96, the smallholders, well, actually only contributed for 4% of the exports of coffee. And last year, there was actually a group that met, and I formed part of it, and we stated three things. Well, efficiency and transparency of the corporation. Efficiency, because we have to compete with the market. It has to be transparent, because we have to be transparent towards our partners in order to have the confidence and to be able to count off, to be sure of their participation. And then, secondly, the quality. The coffee should be a synonym for quality, because actually in this way only the price can be improved for the producers, and the prices were very low at this particular moment. And then, third issue, allies with other producers, to look for allies and other smallholders. So then we started working together with 80 corporations, 70,000 smallholders, with about 80% of the market share. And actually all the actors treat us with respect. But nevertheless, the question mark remains whether the corporations have a future or not with these prices. Is this possible or not? And especially when the macroeconomics are adverse. My corporations pay 30% income tax, and actually they are in the worst prediction conditions, and their the exporters of asparagus or mango, they pay 15%, they receive a premium of 6% of the value by the state. And this doesn't apply to certified coffee for the fair trade. We receive nothing. These are the situations we have to deal with. And the smallholders are able to influence in politics if they are organized. And otherwise, they have no way to survive or to articulate itself in the market. Thank you.
Respond to the audience or to Lorenzo's?
No, I would like to add to what I...
Okay, go ahead.
Is it audible? The point I want to re-emphasize here is that there is nothing wrong as such in the value chain approach on paper. But what we are looking at is the poor people are not homogeneous lot. That must be understood in the South Asian context. They're living under socio-political vulnerability all the time. My only submission here is that the value chain, if you link it up to the larger markets, their vulnerability should not increase. On the contrary, it should decrease. And that is what is the point of debate here. And the other issue here is you value value chain, you value the product, you value the commodity on economic level only. The product and the produce which the small producers are generating, it has to have a social valuation, the cultural valuation, the ecological valuation. If you factor in all these valuations, I think the value chain gets a new perspective, a new dimension, and that's what I have been stressing about.
Okay. Yes, first over there.
Peter Ratting from the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development. I'm just wondering, here we're focusing a lot on, if we look at the actors we're talking about farmers, producers, organizations, and market context. I'm wondering whether we're not missing the focus on the role of the state. And so I'd like to hear comments on that. At UNRIS, we just finished a large report called Combating Poverty and Inequality, which we presented here at ISS yesterday. And in it, we look at the historical experiences of countries that were relatively successful in reducing poverty over fairly short periods of time, both historically and today. And in relation to rural development, we see the crucial role of contestation and social activism and mobilization of farmers' movements and others supporting them. We see the alliances between farmers' movements and political parties, and we see bureaucracies which had a certain competency and capacity to address farmers' issues. So I think it's important to bring back to remember the key role of the state in all this. Thank you.
Okay. Would you like to respond to that, or do you have something else? Okay, good.
My name is Bert Helmsing from the ISS.
Please.
Bert Helmsing from the ISS. Yes, I want to make a comment in that direction. I think, and in response to Mr. Sharma's comment, I think value chain analysis has put our focus on the organization of markets. But I do not always point to what are the sort of intangible assets that lie behind the market or behind the positioning of particular actors in the market. And I think that is something that we called this morning embedding of the chain, the local embedding of the chain, and that in fact sometimes the performance and the functioning of an actor in a chain is actually due to these intangibles that are not really seen in market chain analysis. May I give one example from a participant that is here in the room, that is Iris Monroe, who sits there, who is doing a PhD comparing lobster chains in the Caribbean. And she has been comparing lobster chains in Jamaica, Nicaragua, and Belize, looking at what is the position of the fishermen in these chains. And it turns out that what is the important issue there is that the government in Belize actually has a restricted access regime in terms of the access to the fishing grounds, which is protecting the small fishermen, which is something that the Nicaraguan and Jamaican governments are not doing. So industrialized fishing is participating in these fishes and making it more difficult for the small fishermen. The Belize government has, in the 60s already, set up a system of cooperatives and has given the cooperatives the exclusive monopoly to export lobsters. Again, that is an intangible asset that they had that they do not have in Nicaragua and in Jamaica. And in that way, you can explain, in fact, the differences in the value in the position of the farmers in the value chain, not so much by the structure of the chain, because they turn out to be fairly identical, including the shares that the small producers have, but in these intangibles that are behind it that are not really captured by value chain analysis. Mm-hmm. That's my first point. My second point is on what is our strategic target? And this is also something that I see some differences, and it's helpful sometimes to make the distinctions. I believe that Lorenzo, if I understand correctly, is talking about fair trade and wants to maintain fair trade, as part of a just society. Other people are saying, well, is that really feasible if the market share of fair trade is really limited? And should therefore the role of fair trade not be something that helps build competencies in small farmers so that they can participate actually in other certification schemes and become independent? Sometimes they become independent with a structural assistance of an NGO as a social enterprise. This morning we saw the case of PAC, which is a chain organizer that is as a social enterprise participating in the chain. Or is the ultimate aim that we actually want small farmers individually or as group actually independently operating in the market, which is a different question again. And I think the critical question is, how can one situation be used as a stepping stone to the next? But this implies that you have clarity about what is the strategic aim. Is the strategic aim maintaining fair trade, or is the strategic aim building independent competencies of small farmers? Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think it would be good to have a next round of, I think we were now responding to what other people have been saying. I would like to invite you for new ideas, ideas which have not been mentioned until now. Anybody? There was a person who wanted to say something in the first round, which was not allowed to say something then. So would you, yeah? And are there more people? Just to have an inventory of, yeah? Okay, we have two.
Yeah, well, what I wanted to say, my name is, by the way, Matthias Oltheim from the University of Groningen. What I wanted to say, or the point that I wanted to make, resembles a bit what is said before right now. And it also connects to what Bert Helmsing said. It all is about, I think, what the strategic opportunities are for small holders. I think there is a market, certain market for many products, and smallholders or smallholder organizations can invest in market opportunities to reap most of the benefits of it, and the market itself can then define for how many smallholders there is a place. But if you then try to include more smallholders than the market allows, or if you try to build capabilities all along the supply base, you get a too big market, and this will depress prices because the supply becomes too large. So I think if the markets are, I wonder if they are not being distorted too much, and if we should not try to rely more on the entrepreneurship of the smallholder organizations themselves and have them invest in strategies they choose carefully themselves, and also have the developing country state or the local state as a participant in building competitiveness bottom up. So, is that a bit clear?
So that's a question especially related to the fair trade system, or is it a broader issue?
It's related to the fair trade system, but also through the whole discussion about inclusion. Should we really try to include so many smallholders, or should we just try to figure out what is the market available and adapt to the market, and then try to reap most of the benefits for it as possible, but not try to make the market bigger than it is, because that will depress prices.
Okay, thank you. Then we have Tom.
Yeah, a small comment on those former speakers. I think one of the issues that Lorenzo raises is that you need to have income for collective action. And then you do it for marketing, but you do it also for political action. And the fair trade system has a built-in mechanism to fund that. Smallholder entrepreneurship doesn't have a mechanism to fund collective action. Because it's very difficult for smallholders to really put money aside for collective action. There's no country except Northern Europe in a century ago which really managed that on a significant scale. Where farm organizations are very strong in Colombia, there is a system of fixed margins which are used on exports to fund research and to fund those kinds of activities. The dairy sector is normally in most countries very well organized because they have also sort of a fixed margin which is taken in the processing plant and channeled to collective action process. I think the issue is that those other market certification programs, other market segments don't have a built-in mechanism that really makes collective action possible.
Okay. We will first have the third person and then I will open the debate. Yes? John.
Is this working? My name is John van Dersen. I work at Hivos. Just to maybe raise another complex issue of inclusion is the price inclusion. So a lot of the value chains, if you look at the pricing mechanism, it only looks at the commodity pricing. It doesn't include water, it doesn't include biodiversity, it doesn't include carbon, it doesn't include many other things that are being paid for, but just not by the value chain. Now, maybe somebody here has some experience on how to include that, not as an individual player or as an individual stakeholder in a chain, but as a chain as a whole. Thank you.
Okay. I saw already a lot of people who wanted to respond to the issue on fair trade again, and where you, Giel, are saying that this whole issue of collective action is in fact a strength of the fair trade system and is very useful also. People wanted to respond to that. Yeah, we have one person there and then...
Yeah, I think that now the fair trade is being put forward as the only single solution to this problem, which is, in my opinion, is bullshit. FNC in Colombia has already for 80 years managed export levy to the benefits of smallholder farmers. Nothing fair trade on it. Fair trade is very exclusive. On purpose I asked Don Lorenzo how many non-organized farmers are there in Peru. Quite a lot apparently. Fair trade does not do anything for those farmers. Nothing, zero. And I think that should change if you want to really work for the poor. The poorest are generally the farmers that are not organized, the smallholder farmers not organized. Those are really the poor. The organized farmers are less poor, still poor, but less poor in general. Yeah? So if you really want to include the poor in the markets, you might go for export levy on export products and use that with a very well developed sector development idea. Not only the producers, but also the exporters, which also may play a role, or others involved. That's what in Colombia is being done, and that's also what before was being done in Africa, until the IMF kicked out all this export levy type of services.
Okay. Yeah. Please.
It's already said by the previous speaker, but the export levies in Colombia are levied by the associations. And it is the state, and this comes up to the point that Peter Hutting also raised, it is the state that authorizes the associations to do that. So there are modalities, you just have to use them. And indeed, also in Colombia, they're used together with competitiveness agreements where all stakeholders in the chain are participating. And it is partly financed through these levies that these competitiveness agreements are implemented. Of course, there is a lot to say about that, but that's another issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if this is about fair trade, because I think your response, because I would like to close the discussion on fair trade as such. I think it's just an example, and I would like to broaden the debate a little bit. So is your inputs related to the fair trade discussion, or? Okay, good.
Yeah. My name is David Rosalie from Wageningen University. I'm a bit worried about our discourse. We talk about small farmers as problematic, they are incompetent, and they are poor. I think small farmers don't recognize themselves in the wording that we use for them. That's the first place. We see them only as a problem that needs to be solved. I see little people talking about, let's say, the value, the opportunity that could arise from smallholder business models. And there's quite some examples where new products are being launched from smallholder basis. I just enjoyed a cup of coffee of Kopi Luwak in Indonesia, which is a coffee bean collected from the wild forest after it has been eaten by wild cats. It's a niche market example, but there's plenty of them if you go around the globe. I think we should stop problematizing the smallholder farmers as a headache.
I already saw Diego, who wanted to respond immediately. Diego.
Okay. Yes, I wanted to go to the point on that non-organized farmers are obviously the poorest. I think that's a prejudice, and it depends on the political structure that the country has. Bolivia, where I come from, all the groups have an organization. It doesn't matter. Even the poorest, they do have an organization. So I think that that prejudice, in my opinion, has to do with the political structure of the country, but not only in political terms, but also in which way is the society organized to deal with the political structure of the country. So I wouldn't say that the poorest are not organized. It really depends on the country and the way the country is putting that up.
Okay. Maybe to go back to the introductions. I think until now in the introduction what was raised was the risks of value chain development in terms of increasing vulnerability of small-scale producers and also having a negative impact on food security issues. I think that has not been really addressed in the debate. I don't know, is there nobody concerned about it? Or and there's another one on policies. I think it's good to focus a little bit more on these two topics. Anybody who would like to react? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I would just, sorry. My name is Janno from Provocation, and I would just like the first speaker to elaborate on the link between, between value chain, which gets smallholder producers more to niche markets, you were saying, and then it sort of leads to decreased food security. How is that link? Yeah.
Okay.
Let me give an example and to illustrate my argument. There is an interesting value chain, which is state-sponsored value chain, which was developed in India, which is around milk. And you all know, perhaps you know about the Amul milk cooperative system, which was there, which was established in the 70s and is a fairly successful model. About more than 1 million farmers are engaged in that, the cooperative system of milk value chain. And they earn reasonably well in terms of the economic gains by producing milk. But those farmers which contributed to this development of the value chain on milk were essentially cattle rearing farmers. For them, that was their main vocation. So building a value chain on a vocation which is their prime occupation is always beneficial, because then they are working on that niche product that they have with them, or the commodity they have with them. But in other cases where the farmers are using multitudes of actions to survive, for their survival, which means they're not only cattle rearing, they're doing some small farming, they're doing some wage labors. So there's so many of the activities they're engaged in. If you pull them into one value chain, and if that value chain that you decide from external sources, I am saying, then the problem here is, does the farmer value that value chain as opposed to the other activities which are socially and culturally integrated into his lifestyle? So that's the point. So the moment you draw him into the economic chain, there is a likely tendency that the gains from the activity need not necessarily get into his building the resources, one, for his own survival, And also it will distance him from the major food producing activity as well. This has happened. And not only around milk, but other cases as well. In the case of milk production, when it gets into the economic side, the farmer is not consuming milk. So there is a nutritional imbalance within the family. And the farmer, since he is pulled into generating more income from cattle rearing and from milk trade, what he gets into it is pulling more water from the ground. Now, India is a water scarce nation, as you know, in certain pockets. And that has led to groundwater depletion in Gujarat. So these are the implications of a chain over a period of time. You don't get to see it when you actually implement the value chain. So because they're marginal people, they're bottom of the pyramid, their survival is at stake, you pull them into some other activity, they lose it out on the food security front. So those are the kind of linkages.
Sharif, you wanted to...
One of the districts that is in cocoa production, the value chain has actually enabled many small producers to just go for that crop and less of food crop. You have one farmer acreage, 70% of it is just on that product. And what does it mean? That even if they get a lot of money, a lot of income, 70% of that income goes to food, which is got from other districts, meaning that it will put that small producer in a very difficult situation. You know, they have just to be slaves to the market for that particular product. And if you look, you analyze cocoa, you know, you cannot intercrop it with any other seasonal crop. It becomes very, very difficult. Yeah.
Any other reactions? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Joost Geit. I'm from Outdoor Organic. I just wanted to link into your question about broadening the discussion. At the moment, I hear particularly a focus, make markets work for the poor, being translated as making sure smallholder farmers can sell their products on the market. Where the debate, I think, is perhaps could be held by also considering that smallholder farmers, some will be linked in and some will fall by the wayside. In Holland, since the 1950s, we've lost 80% of our agricultural producers. That's a reality. Doesn't mean that they're all become extremely poor. There are alternative jobs, alternative opportunities that have been developed in response to that. And that's perhaps a policy area which can be captured by supporting government policies or perhaps other actors who say, well, those who fall outside this market connection, what opportunities do we offer them? And what about the ones who will never be able to connect because they don't have land, they don't have the capital, they don't have the basic resources to ever reach the level of inclusion? How do we also create opportunities for them?
I'm Jorge Chavez Tafur, and I work with IIED, and I wanted to raise another issue which I think hasn't been mentioned yet, and that is of the consumers. If we're talking about markets, who are the consumers that we're trying to reach or that we're trying to target? Is it just the people who are going to drink coffee in Starbucks, which is great if there are more of them, but what about regional markets, local markets? And what about putting the question the other way around? Are these farmers, are they not also consumers? And don't we want them also to consume more and to benefit from the market, not just as suppliers of products, but also as a demand of more diverse products?
Okay, so that's a new issue. I wanted to invite 2, maximum 3 people before we have a small break. I see Koen already. Go ahead.
In my experience, smallholders are not by definition poor, certainly not. There are smallholders who can produce 10 kg per tree of coffee or cocoa, but more than 80% in the projects we work in produce 1 kg or less. And so the richness of poorness in between smallholders is often related to this wide variation in yield and quality of product, which normally go together. So let's look at those who are at 1 kg, while their neighbors are at 10 which is very strange in terms of extension service, etc. And let's look at the things like food security. If 80% of smallholder areas in coffee and cocoa produce only 1/10 of what it can produce, it's quite logic that larger entrepreneurs and Chinese and whatever people say, well, we can do better, so let's buy that land and produce 10 times more. And finally, probably just for food security, it may be a solution, but it's not a social solution in my mind. So all these things point to the need to look at the reasons why 80% of smallholders are so poor in their production system. What are the reasons behind it? Why is extension service and management and farm organizations so extremely poor that 80% produce at 1/10 of what they potentially can produce? We have to look at those reasons. We know a few, but normally we just walk around it and say hello to each other and are not serious in addressing the problems that exist in those chains. So I think in order to address inclusiveness and food security, we have to be much more serious in analyzing problems in a few major chains where at least 10 million of smallholders are depending from.
And you're raising a lot of questions, but do you have some of the answers? Because you raised the question of why are services so poor? Why are producers producing so little?
I raised one point already, which is we try to correct some things by standards, and some standards claim that they train smallholders in order to improve, but that's not, in most cases, and also in the case of fair trade, is not happening really, or at a very, very small scale. It should happen in a much more serious way. And the second point is looking at problems. I think that most of us are aware that capacity building and management issues are in many situations the major problems. Not in the first place good agricultural practices, but much more on the management issues. And I would say also governments, to answer that question, are not very serious in providing, in facilitating organizational structures. Most of the cooperative acts are not very, very open for modern chain organizations, so to say. So I see main problems in management and organizational structures, which we are not addressing as NGOs and also not as governments.
Yeah. Lena had one, and then we have a last person over there before we have a small break. Lena.
Okay, thank you. I have a comment from our chat, from the live stream, from Sarah. And she's saying, I feel like this debate is about how to integrate poor farmers into the value chain, while in my opinion, value chain is rather a theoretic framework to look at reality and make it more efficient for all actors involved in a product or a market. And next to that, out-of-the-box thinking is needed. Small farmers are entrepreneurs, so an entrepreneurial approach is needed. What markets fit my product? What products can I offer to what markets? So those are the basic questions, and the answers change all the time depending on the opportunities, which are determined by the consumers and also by the government policies.
So that's already a nice wrap-up of some of the issues we have been discussing. Yeah. Last person before the break.
Yeah, two issues. First of all, I'm Hans van der Heuvel, trying to coordinate agriculture, food security within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There are two things I would like to react on. One is that these poor buggers, these farmers, are producing so little, and that many will think that has to do with irrational behavior, but it's completely rational. They are producing suboptimal because there's no purchasing power around them to buy their products at a decent price. If that was the case, then they would invest in their agriculture. So I think that is a very, very important one, and it has to do with risk spreading. If we look at African systems with 15 types of different vegetables and fruits on a plot of half an acre, it has to do with also
let's say, the difficulties you may encounter with plagues, with droughts. So you have to go for multi-cropping systems to have a sort of risk management in your life supporting system. That's one thing I would like to come up with. The other has to do with the statement that change would be a threat to food security. Well, it could be that occasionally it goes in that direction, but I would rather see that as an exception than as a rule, because generally a farmer has a rational moment that he will say, I will be part of it or I will be out of it. If he decides to go for it, then it would probably be for reasons of, again, this better price he will get for his product. Now, if that better price, and it could be all kinds of products, could be cacao, he can't eat cacao as a staple, but he will get, let's say, a good price for it, and he can buy food security with that price. So we have to delink it also and look at what is the what are the opportunity costs and how can he secure access to food. So the same situation is in the Netherlands, where we lost a large part of our farmers, but we do not suffer really hunger in this country because there are quite decent incomes. My own family, I would like to give a short example of that. My father was one of 9. He had to quit with his farm. We were all better off later, 9 children, 5 went to the university, because of the fact that my father got a steady income. And so we could purchase food, and there could be a sort of plan to invest in the bringing up of the children as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've addressed a number of areas which might need further exploration and discussion that I would like to suggest to do after the break. We have a very short break, 5 minutes, so you can all get something to drink, and then we will continue in about 5 minutes.